Some events don't begin with chaos. They begin quietly. Listen up. I'm not here to tell you some fake scary story you forget in 5 minutes. I'm talking about the kind of situation that sneaks up on you while you're busy living your normal life. The kind you ignore because nothing feels wrong enough at first. If you leave early, you miss the part that actually connects the dots, and once you see that pattern, it's hard to unsee it. So don't half listen. Don't treat this like background noise. Tonight on Tales of the Darkness, this is about people who don't look dangerous until they already know too much. Story 1. The one who learned my schedule. My name is Eric, and back then my life was boring in the most exhausting way. Same job, same shifts, same faces every day. The kind of routine that makes you stop paying attention because everything blends together. And that's exactly why I didn't clock what was happening right away. I worked retail, long hours, minimum sleep, and you get used to coworkers coming and going, so when she started working there, I didn't think twice about it. She wasn't loud or dramatic or obviously weird. She was just always around, always close enough to hear, always looking a little too focused. At first, it was small comments. Nothing you could call out without sounding paranoid. Stuff like mentioning what time I usually came in, joking about how predictable my shifts were, pointing out habits I didn't remember explaining to anyone. I laughed it off because retail makes people bored and bored people talk, but then it kept happening, and the comments stopped sounding random and started sounding specific. She knew which days I closed, she knew I checked the back door twice before leaving, she knew when I stayed late, and none of it was said like a question, it was said like confirmation. That's when it started getting under my skin, not panic yet, just that tight feeling you get when something isn't lining up. I tried creating distance, switching tasks, keeping conversations short. But that didn't stop it. It just made her adjust. She waited until we were alone, stood too close under the excuse of needing help, asked casual questions that were really about patterns, how long my commute was, whether I liked quiet places, whether I lived alone. I never gave straight answers, but she didn't seem bothered. She nodded like she already had them. What really messed with me was how she reacted when I broke routine. The night I left early, she didn't act surprised. She looked confused, like something she expected to happen didn't. And that was the moment I realized she wasn't just paying attention, she was tracking. After that, I noticed her watching the clock more than customers, watching me instead of the register, and the store stopped feeling like a job and started feeling like a place where someone was keeping tabs on me. I told myself I was overthinking it, because that's easier than admitting someone might be building a picture of your life without your permission. But that excuse died the night she casually mentioned what time my apartment lights usually turned off. After she said that about my lights turning off, I didn't react the way you'd expect. I laughed it off, made some joke, because calling it out in the moment felt riskier than pretending it was nothing. But inside my head, everything shifted, because that wasn't something you overhear at work or guess by accident. That's something you learn by watching. I started paying attention back, not in an obvious way, just enough to notice patterns I'd ignored before. How she always knew when I was about to leave, how she never asked what time it was, but always showed up right before my break ended, how she somehow managed to be in the same aisle whenever I was alone. I changed my routine on purpose, stayed late one night, left early another, took a longer route home, and every time I did, She reacted, not emotionally, not angry, just slightly off, like something didn't line up the way it was supposed to. One night after closing, I walked out to the parking lot and saw her car still there. Even though her shift ended earlier, she was sitting inside with the lights off, not doing anything, just waiting. And when she noticed me, she waved like it was normal, like that's what coworkers do. I didn't say anything. I just got in my car and drove, but halfway home I realized she was behind me. Not tailgating, not obvious, just far enough back to pretend it was coincidence. And she stayed there until I turned into my street, then kept going. That was the first time fear stopped being theoretical. After that, things showed up in places they shouldn't have. A note in my locker that didn't say anything threatening, just mentioned something I did alone at home. A comment the next day about a show I watched late, details that only make sense if someone's paying attention from closer than they should be. I reported it quietly and was told there wasn't enough to go on, nothing overt, nothing provable, and that made it worse because now I knew I was on my own. The last time I saw her was after another shift change I didn't tell anyone about. I walked out, expecting relief, and instead saw her leaning against the wall near the exit, smiling like she'd been waiting exactly that long. She didn't follow me that night. She didn't say anything either. She just looked at me and said my name the way you say something you own. I quit not long after without giving a reason, moved, changed routines, cut contact. But even now, I still catch myself checking patterns, lights, locks, reflections. Because once someone learns your schedule, they don't forget it, they just wait for the next time it fits. Story 2. The one who never needed an invite. My name is Marcus, and this started because I needed help with rent. Nothing dramatic, just one of those situations where money runs tight and you tell yourself it's temporary. You convince yourself that letting the wrong person into your space is better than drowning alone. I put the word out that I needed a roommate, someone quiet, someone low profile, someone who wouldn't bring problems home, and that right there was the mistake because quiet doesn't mean safe. It just means harder to notice. When he showed up, he didn't set off alarms, no weird energy, no awkward questions. He shook my hand, looked me in the eye, spoke soft, the kind of guy who fades into the background on purpose. He moved in with barely anything, a couple bags, a locked container he didn't explain, and that should have bothered me more than it did. But I was tired and rent was covered, so I let it slide. For a while, it felt like I'd won. He kept to himself, worked late, barely made noise. I'd hear the door click at night, and that was it. No mess, no drama, no reason to think twice. That's how it gets you. Nothing feels wrong because nothing is loud. Then small things started shifting, nothing you could point to, just that sense that the apartment didn't reset when I was alone, like it remembered someone else being there. Stuff moved slightly, not stolen, not obvious, just repositioned enough to make me question my memory. And every time I brought it up casually, he already knew what I was talking about, like he'd been waiting for me to notice. He never asked where I was going, never asked about my schedule, but somehow he always knew when I'd be back. The door would unlock right as I reached for my keys, or he'd already be in the kitchen like he timed it. I started staying out later just to see what would happen, and every time I did, I'd come home to signs he'd been active in my space while I was gone, not trash or noise, just presence. like he wanted the apartment to feel shared, even when it wasn't. The moment I stopped brushing it off was the night I realized he knew my habits better than I did. He mentioned something I only ever did alone, something I never talked about, and he said it casually, like it was common knowledge. And that's when it hit me that this wasn't about rent or roommates anymore. It was about access. After that comment, I stopped pretending it was nothing, but I didn't confront him either. Because confronting someone only works when you're sure what you're dealing with, and I wasn't. All I knew was that my space didn't feel like mine anymore. I started locking my bedroom door, even when I was home, not because I thought it would stop anything, but because I needed a boundary that felt solid. And the messed up part is he never mentioned it, never asked why, never joked about it. He just adjusted, like he'd already expected it. I noticed he stopped using certain rooms when I was around and started using them more when I wasn't. I'd come home and feel that familiar sense that someone had been active in the apartment, even though everything looked normal. One night I came back earlier than usual without texting anyone, and found him sitting in the dark living room with no lights on, not watching TV, not on his phone, just sitting there like he was waiting for a sound cue. And when I walked in, he didn't jump or react. He just turned his head and said my name like he knew I'd be there. That's when I realized he wasn't surprised by my presence. He was tracking it. I started sleeping lighter, listening for footsteps, paying attention to doors, and I caught small things that I wish I hadn't. My bedroom door handle moving slightly when I was pretending to be asleep, my stuff being placed back in exact positions I'd left them, not rummaged through, just checked. I thought about leaving, but leaving takes planning, and planning takes time, and time is what makes situations like this dangerous. The last straw came when I found something that proved he'd been in my room while I wasn't there. Not stolen, not damaged, just moved enough to say I was here and I know you noticed. I packed a bag that night and left without explaining. Crashed on a friend's couch, blocked his number, and cut contact. I never reported it because I didn't know how to explain something that never crossed a clean line. I heard later that he'd moved on quickly, found another place, another roommate, another quiet setup. What sticks with me isn't that he did something extreme, it's that he didn't need to. He had access, he had time, and he knew exactly how close he could get without forcing anything. And that's the kind of person you don't hear about until someone finally stops answering messages. Story 3. The one who watched from inside. My name is Daniel, and this happened during a period of my life when I was actively trying to be invisible, not in a dramatic way, just keeping my head down, working, coming home, not wanting trouble, not wanting attention. And that mindset is exactly what let this slide for longer than it should have. I was staying in a cheap place while handling work in another area. Nothing fancy, just a room, a door, a few nights of sleep, and at first it felt forgettable in the way temporary places usually do. The first night went by without anything obvious, which is why the second night felt wrong so fast. I started noticing the room didn't feel the same when I came back after work. Not messy, not disturbed, just slightly reset, like someone had been there long enough for the air to change. Stuff wasn't missing, but it wasn't exactly where I remembered leaving it either. A chair angled a little differently, the TV volume turned lower than I use it, the bathroom door cracked when I know I shut it. I blamed myself, because that's easier than admitting something doesn't add up. Long days mess with your head and memory fills in gaps without asking permission. What made it harder to ignore was how consistent it was. Every night the same small shifts, never enough to complain about, never enough to explain, just enough to make me start double-checking myself. I stopped unpacking my bag because it felt pointless, like the room wasn't really private, like it belonged to someone else part of the time. I started testing it without saying it out loud, leaving things in specific positions, angles that I knew I'd remember, and every time I came back they were just slightly off, never random, always careful. I didn't hear noises, didn't see shadows, nothing cinematic, just that constant sense that I wasn't the first one there. One night I stayed up later than usual with the lights off and the TV muted, just listening, and that's when I realized how quiet the place really was. Not peaceful quiet, controlled quiet, the kind that feels like it's waiting for a sound to react to. I sat there long enough that my breathing slowed without me noticing, and that's when I felt it. Not a sound, not movement, just the awareness that I was no longer the only one paying attention to the room, like something had shifted the moment I stopped filling the space with noise. I didn't turn around, because whatever was behind me didn't need movement to let me know it was there. After that realization, sleep stopped being automatic. I lay there every night pretending to rest while my brain stayed sharp, listening for changes in the room instead of sounds, because sounds can lie but patterns don't. I started leaving the bathroom light on when I left for work and turning it off when I came back just to see if it stayed the same. Sometimes it did, sometimes it didn't, and the inconsistency was worse than if it had been wrong every time. I checked the lock more than I needed to, not because it felt loose, but because touching it reminded me it was there. And one night, when I came back later than usual, I noticed the chain had been set differently than I use it. Not latched, just moved, like someone had tested how far it would go. I stood there longer than I should have, staring at that detail, because it meant whoever was inside didn't rush, didn't panic, didn't need to leave fast. I stopped using the bed and slept on top of the covers fully dressed, shoes nearby, phone charged, not because I planned to fight anything, but because I wanted to be ready without thinking. The worst moment came when I got back one night and felt that familiar shift in the air again, heavier than before, and without thinking I said out loud that I knew someone was there, not yelling, not threatening, just stating it, and the room didn't react the way I expected. There was no noise, no movement, but the silence changed, like something had acknowledged me and settled in closer. I stood there waiting for anything to happen, and nothing did, which somehow felt worse than if it had, because it meant whatever was sharing that space didn't need to rush or hide. After that, I stopped trying to prove anything to myself, stopped testing the room, stopped adjusting routines, and just existed there while counting time. And that's when it hit me that this wasn't building toward a moment, it was already in one. Even now, I don't think about what was in that room. I think about how easily I stayed, how long it took before leaving even crossed my mind, and how many people probably feel that same hesitation every night, telling themselves nothing feels wrong enough yet. Before you scroll, there's one thing you need to sit with. None of what you just heard started loud. None of it needed force. Every single situation worked because it followed a routine, because someone paid attention, because someone waited long enough for things to feel normal again. That's the part people miss. The danger isn't the moment everything goes wrong. It's the time before, when nothing looks urgent and you convince yourself you're overthinking it. That's where this stuff actually lives. If you made it this far, you already know why that matters. You didn't need monsters or demons to keep listening. You stayed because this felt close, because it felt possible. If you're the kind of person who sticks around for stories like this, you already belong here. Join the crew, subscribe, and keep your doors locked the way you remember them. We'll talk again soon.